This video was initially scheduled to be released on the TLDR EU channel, and well, things changed, and it's here on TLDR UK. Anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge the different colour scheme before we started, and encourage you to subscribe to TLDR EU. It's linked down below, if you're interested in more content like this. The link to TLDR US is also down there, so knock yourself out. Have you ever wanted to learn about a really long gas pipe? One that travels through a continent and has recently caused political controversy? Well, what if I was to tell you that there's not just one, but two of them? Okay, this doesn't sound interesting, but trust us, it is. And to be fair, you read the title of this video and decided you want to watch it, so you clearly have some interest in a couple of long pipes, so we ought to say this one's on you. Okay, so enough stalling, let's crack on. Nord Stream 2, the name of the second long pipe, is in the news a little bit at the moment, mainly because politics is getting in the way. But before we get into the juicy politics of the pipe, we need to go back to Nord Stream 1, exactly what it is, why it was made, and why that one was so successful, where its successor may not be. Okay, so the first Nord Stream was thought up in the late 1990s. It was an ambitious project to create a pipe that went under the sea between Russia and Germany, to provide Europe with natural Russian gas. The project began with the creation of the company North Transgas by Neste, a Finnish company, and Gazprom, a Russian company, with North Transgas being formed in 1997. Only a year later, a survey was conducted to scout out the exact route of the pipe through the exclusive economic zones of a bunch of European countries, including both Finland and Germany. In 2005, the other countries who had invested in North Transgas sold their shares to Gazprom, making Gazprom the only shareholder. It should be pointed out at this point that Gazprom is a Russian state-owned business. In the same year, Gazprom started to build their onshore feeding pipe in Russia. Then the following year, 2006, was when the name Nord Stream became official, and the environmental impact forms were sent out to all of the countries that the pipeline was planned to pass through. So far, this has all been fairly standard. The next step, though, was seeking approval from the countries whose waters, or exclusive economic zones, the pipeline was set to go through. In order to do this, the company even took on a former Finnish Prime Minister as a consultant, in order to try and get approval from Finland. His job was, unsurprisingly, to try and get the project approved by Finland and others as quickly as possible. Eventually, though, all the countries involved signed off on the proposal, and with construction taking place quickly, the last pipe was laid in 2011, ready for it to be connected up to the German Opal pipeline. So this was Nord Stream 1. Well, this was the history of its construction. As it was planned in the late 1990s, many of the tensions that now exist between Western Europe and Russia had not happened just yet. Having said that, the pipeline was always controversial. Obviously, one of the main reasons for this is that it increases the power of Russia in the energy sector. As Russia is, and was at the time, a big producer of natural gas, it was expected that Nord Stream would supply Western Europe with vast amounts of gas from Russia. Therefore, it was claimed that this would result in Western Europe becoming reliant on Russia and their gas. This has proven to be accurate, with an article from CSIS showing that Germany has hugely increased its dependence on Russia for natural gas, and many other former Soviet countries have switched from exporting natural gas to Germany to importing it from them. Others have also claimed that the pipeline allowed Russia to bypass the transit countries, which are mainly former Soviet countries, including Ukraine, Belarus and Poland. This is because prior to Nord Stream, gas pipes travelled through these countries and distributed gas to Europe. Thus, by building the pipeline, Russia has lessened their dependence on these countries. And it certainly did annoy these nations, with the Polish defence minister comparing the agreement between Germany and Russia to the Pact of 1939, where Poland was carved up into two nations. He claimed that this new pipeline would allow Russia to cut off Poland and Belarus's gas supply, without having to also cut off Western Europe, something which was previously impossible, as the gas would have had to flow through these countries to reach Western Europe. With Nord Stream in place, they could easily cut off these states, without needing to impact Western Europe at all. Just to be clear, another major reason that countries like Poland and Belarus were annoyed is because previously they would have been entitled to a transit fee. Nord Stream eliminated this, so there's definitely a financial component to it too. Anyway, as an article in the New York Times points out, if Russia is able to cut off countries like Belarus and Poland, they can clearly have more leverage over them. While in other states, such as Ukraine, if the leadership of the country becomes more supportive of the West than Russia, then gas prices can simply be increased. And this has happened twice in Ukraine. In fact, sometimes their supply is even totally cut. And this kind of Russian control is now able to happen in more countries, thanks to Nord Stream. Another concern raised about Nord Stream is its adverse impact on the environment. Obviously, with any energy project that takes place through a habitat of any form of animal, there will be concerns that the project will disrupt the species. For Nord Stream, the habitats that were being upset were those of birds and fish. And the WWF kicked up quite a lot of fuss about the project, claiming that countries should safeguard the Baltic marine habitats, which were being affected by Nord Stream. It should be noted that they asked this only of the countries who signed up to the Baltic Marine Environmental Protection Commission, but this is just a technicality. In fact, there was so much concern about Baltic wildlife that a petition was written and signed in a lot of countries that the pipeline was set to go through. This culminated in the EU looking into the matter. It was decided though that ultimately the project would be allowed to continue. Okay, so fairly briefly, that was Nord Stream 1. Now let's move on to its more recent successor, the uninventively named Nord Stream 2. Firstly, why does Nord Stream 1 need a sequel? Well, need is a strong word, but basically the second Nord Stream will just double capacity. For Russia, Nord Stream 2 will simply increase the power that Russia has crafted for itself, using its natural gas reserves. So this is very basically why. It allows more gas to be transferred. But what's the controversy? If Nord Stream 1 was signed off on, then why is its sequel attracting so much controversy? Well, as a politics channel, we wouldn't be discussing this if the answer wasn't political. I didn't read through the history of a goddamn pipe for the controversy to be around the kind of alloy they used. Although Germany has benefited from Nord Stream 1 economically, making it somewhat of a natural gas hub for Europe, it may no longer be willing to take part in Russia's energy game. And this is largely because of the recent poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. When flying from Tomsk to Moscow, Navalny fell ill. His staff suspected that the tea he drank in the airport that morning had been poisoned. Upon arriving in Germany to receive treatment, it was discovered that the type of poison that had been used was the same one used in the Salisbury poisoning, Novichok. In fact, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been pretty strong on the issue, condemning Putin and the Russians for the attack, for which she says there's unequivocal proof.
Dieses Gift lässt sich zweifelsfrei in den Proben nachweisen. Damit ist sicher, Alexei Navalny ist Opfer eines Verbrechens. Er sollte zum Schweigen gebracht werden und ich verurteile das auch im Namen der ganzen Bundesregierung auf das Allerschärfste. Das Verbrechen an Alexei Navalny richtet sich gegen die Grundwerte und Grundrechte, für die wir eintreten. Ich danke Ihnen.
She's not the only one making comments like this, with a CDU Foreign Affairs Committee member commenting, "Germany's diplomatic approach with Russia has run out of road. For years we've misunderstood the game of chess that the Kremlin has been playing with us, and now we cannot pull the sanction strings any tighter without garrotting ourselves." Although Germany sees the link between Nord Stream and the poisoning as obvious, Russia vehemently refutes this. A Kremlin spokesman stated that the poisoning should stop being mentioned in the context of any politicization, and that this is a commercial project that is absolutely in line with the interests of both Russia and the European Union countries, and primarily Germany. This is all an interesting move from Germany though, as they previously backed the project. Having said this, Merkel has not yet confirmed whether she's going to halt the project going forward, but she's under increasing pressure to do so. And as we've seen, she's publicly stated her disapproval of the poisoning. Anyway, before we finish, let's quickly go over why Germany had previously supported the project, and then whether it's likely that Merkel will end up cancelling it. Merkel's initial defence of Nord Stream 2 was based on the big claim that construction will in fact ease tensions with Russia and decrease their influence on Germany. This seems counterintuitive. But the logic is that Russia supposedly relies more on the sale of gas to Germany than Germany does on buying it. This means that as a result, Germany can implement sanctions on Russia simply by lowering the amount they import. Obviously, some didn't agree. Well, lots of people didn't, with the US and most of Europe coming out against the plan, arguing that the pipeline would simply integrate Russia further into the energy sector in mainland Europe, and would allow them to bully neighbouring countries such as Belarus and Poland, without losing out on the business from the rest of Europe, as we discussed earlier. In fact, in the US, this issue is bipartisan. I know, a rarity, with both President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden calling for the cessation of construction. However, the US does want to sell Europe its liquefied natural gas, so there may be a monetary motive behind their opposition. Even within Germany, there's mounting pressure to cancel the project. Unsurprisingly, the Greens are against it, but they're also joined by the pro-business Free Democrats and the CDU, Merkel's own party. In fact, the Greens' co-leader said last week that the pipeline indirectly finances a regime that does not shy away from using banned weapons of mass destruction. Anyway, while there is increasing pressure on German leadership, it's been reported that Merkel is, despite her outrage over the poisoning, unlikely to actually cancel the project. There's been some suggestion that halting the project may not even be legal, and Merkel herself has apparently seemed cautious about doing so. One reason she may not be rushing into any decision could be because the project costs 9.5 billion euros and is already 94% complete. So stopping it now could cost Germany, not just in future potential revenue, but also all of the work that's already gone into it. It could also increase tensions with Russia, maybe even to the point where these tensions could bubble over. Russia has been able to exercise great power as a result of Nord Stream, and Germany cancelling the project at the last minute, when it's almost complete, could lead to a diplomatic breakdown between the two, which is clearly not in Germany's interests. Having said that, Germany already seems to be annoying the US with their support for the project. The point we're trying to make here is that it's a deeply complex political situation, and a tough one for Germany to be in. No matter what they do, they're going to upset someone. Pursue the project and they'll frustrate the US. Don't pursue the project and they'll frustrate Russia and lose out on a great deal of money. So, what do you think? Should Merkel stop the project in protest of the poisoning, as well as to limit Russian influence and economic damage? Or should she sanction Russia in other ways? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when we release videos in the future. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos, just like Jade Peak, John Clapshoe and Alexandru Dobre, then be sure to back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.